By the way, just give us a brief overview of the Probe website, what's there, what you guys do, and how people can access it.
Sure. Well, a lot of people on AFR Talk get to hear the program in the afternoon, and we focus on all sorts of issues related to worldview or apologetics. That is, anything that has to do with things in the news, how we think about that from a biblical point of view, as well as apologetics, not only knowing how to articulate a biblical worldview, but also knowing how to defend a biblical worldview. So lots of articles that you can find, transcripts of radio programs, free PowerPoint presentations, podcasts, lots of great material. So I hope that all of our listeners at some time or another, if they're on a computer, will go to probe.org and find out what's there and use it in an effective way for their own ministry.
Kerby, let's talk about the situation, anti-Christian attitudes that are popping up. Seems like more and more in America, especially in pop culture, Hollywood, sometimes in politics and government. But is that, are we too sensitive to this, or do you think that's a reality that these things seem to be increasing, these anti-Christian attitudes and statements and biases?
Well, as a talk show host just like you, I recognize that in the old days, we used to, from time to time, cover a religious liberty issue, posting of the Ten Commandments, a valedictorian, student that wasn't allowed to say Jesus, something like that. And so one of the things we did on Point of View is we would bring in Kelly Shackelford of Liberty Institute, or if he couldn't be with us, somebody else that would be very familiar to our listening audiences, Jay Sekulow, Tony Perkins, whoever it might be, and talk about it. And I've jokingly said to especially Kelly Shackelford, who's usually with us every Friday, that I could bring you in every day. I mean, it's not like this has been an occasional issue. It seems to have intensified. And, of course, Tony Perkins and Kelly Shackelford put out what was called the Survey of Religious Hostility in America. And if you don't have to even look at all the statistics, just think about in the last couple of weeks. We had the story of the Florida student, Ryan Rotella, in Florida Atlantic University, was told to write the name Jesus on a piece of paper, put it on the floor, and then stomp on the name Jesus. Just the last couple of days, we had a situation where in Alabama, of all places, a principal said that he banned the word Easter. Now, we're not talking about banning the word Jesus, or we're not banning the word Christianity. We're banning the word Easter. You know, it's kind of like those holiday trees, Tim, we used to talk about so often that everybody was selling at Christmas time. But everywhere we turn, there's another story that just illustrates a level of either ambivalence towards Christianity or downright hostility towards Christianity. And so that's certainly, I think, of real concern. And, of course, as we open up the phones, I'm sure we'll hear all sorts of stories of people that have faced similar kinds of situations, either in the schools or in the public arena in their business. And I just think it has intensified rather dramatically.
Well, and Kerby, it's not limited to just the United States. And by the way, you mentioned opening up the phones. Let's go ahead and start getting some callers in queue at 888-589-8840. That's 888-589-8840. But Kerby, as we begin to see things intensify in the United States, it's just that much worse in the Middle East and Sudan and other places, isn't it?
It certainly is. And again, I will, along the way, recommend some books, some articles, websites, but really a very good book that came out that Paul Marshall, Nina Shea, and others have written called Persecuted, The Global Assault on Christians, documents the level of persecution around the world. So what we talk about as persecution maybe with a small p, although sometimes it gets pretty intense. You know, those of us that have ever had a death threat, you realize, well, that's pretty significant. But when you go overseas, specialists recognize two real major hotspots, the leftover communist countries and, most importantly, the Muslim countries. There is a level of persecution of Christians that really, again, is unprecedented. More people died as a result of persecution in the 20th century than the previous centuries combined. And part of that, of course, is due to the increase in population, but also it just illustrates that we live in a time of persecution around the world, and we enjoy a level of freedom that we certainly should not take for granted in this country, because if we want to understand what happens if we lose those religious liberties, all we have to do is travel to some of those countries and see the plight of Christians in other parts of the world.
Kerby, and one other question, that we can go to we're talking about Christian persecution here and abroad. The phone number, as Jim said, is 888-589-8840. We call it Fire Away Thursday because we're going to take as many of your phone calls as you fire away with your questions. Now, one question I have before we go to the phones: what is there to persecute about Christianity? I mean,
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, well, I can understand maybe some other philosophies or ideologies, or maybe that are aggressive or whatever, or do bodily harm to other people. But Christianity, why suppress Christianity? Why persecute Christians? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that your point's well taken, because if you go to some countries in the world, there are certain provinces in China where they say we value Christians because they show up on time, they work hard, they have integrity. We'd rather have a Christian worker than a non-Christian worker. So there are places in the world, even to this day, where maybe the government persecutes Christians, but the reality is out on the streets is, well, actually, we think these are very good people. We'd like to have more of them. And there are a lot of people that would love to have more Christians in their business because, again, theoretically, Christians are a little bit better. I wish they were a lot better, but at least a little bit better than the world. So the only way I think you can understand that, Tim and Jim, is to maybe go to a book I wrote a number of years ago called A Biblical Point of View on Spiritual Warfare. If it weren't for the fact that there is a spiritual battle taking place, and the Scriptures talk about the fact that we war not just against flesh and blood, but against principalities and various forces against us, that's the only explanation. I mean, you can use this in a different way. Let's get off of Christianity for a minute. Why is it that people have such an issue about Jews? I mean, why do we have so much anti-Semitism in the world? Think about that. There's only maybe 18 million Jewish people in the entire world. There's more than 2 billion Christians. There's more than 1.5 billion Muslims. There's probably another billion Hindu and Buddhist combined. Jewish people are very insignificant, but look at the anti-Semitism that has existed for centuries and exists even to this day in many countries. I think the only way you can explain that is because of a spiritual battle taking place, that they're God's chosen people and people want to vilify Jews. Well, if we move back to Christianity, if indeed a lot of people recognize that Christians probably are really good people to have as neighbors, they're going to turn the other cheek. At least they're supposed to. They're supposed to live their life in a more moral way. These are the kind of people you would want to have in your business, is the kind of people you want to have in your neighborhood. Frankly, these are the kind of people you'd want to have in the government. But nevertheless, there is a real hostility oftentimes that I think is spiritually motivated against Christians.
Well, Kerby, we appreciate that because your insight is so good and so keen on that. And you're listening to today's issues on American Family Radio, 888-589-8840 as we go into Fire Away Thursday. And let's go to the phones and talk to Donnie calling from Oklahoma. Donnie, welcome to today's issues.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. Just wanted to ask a question. The Bible says that people perish because of lack of vision. I was kind of curious your take on what is as Christians today, what's our vision? And who is casting the vision for us? Who are the leaders in the Christian faith now that are casting vision for us and leading us? It seems like we all run around chasing our tails sometimes, and like the gay rights activists out there, they've been planning to make their agenda normal since the 60s and 70s, and just kind of curious where the Christians are going. What are our goals? What are our strategies?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Donnie.
We'll let you listen.
Appreciate it. I got my thoughts on that, but go ahead, Kerby.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts as a matter of fact, too, because you and I have both talked about this a little bit. There was a time in which there was a unified kind of vision, not completely, but let's, maybe go back a few decades, and you had your father and Jerry Falwell and Marlon Maddox, and we had D. James Kennedy, and we had, a lot of individuals that were associated sort of with the so-called Christian right. You had the moral majority, you had the Christian voice, you had a lot of sense of cooperation and working together. Not that we don't. You and I cooperate quite a bit on things, but there is a sense in which I do believe that we have a bit of a leadership vacuum. Certainly, I've mentioned some names like Tony Perkins, and we can mention Gary Bauer, and we can mention a number of others, but there is a sense in which I think Christians are saying, okay, who's the quarterback, or who are maybe the committee that's sort of calling the plays, and what's our vision, and where do we need to go? And I think, frankly, Donnie's raised a very good question, because we probably need to do more to cooperate, and there are sometimes venues where we all get together and talk, but I think it would be helpful to have some prominent pastors and some prominent leaders of Christian organizations kind of work together. And one example of that I just alluded to a minute ago, and that is Kelly Shackelford and Tony Perkins put together what's called the Survey of Religious Hostility. So you've got Family Research Council and Liberty Institute producing some joint material saying, here's the problem and here's where we need to go. And so, Tim, I think we need to do a lot more of that. And I know as a leader of American Family Association, you've been thinking about that quite a bit.
Well, and Kerby and Tim, that's one thing. And one of the things that you pointed out, Kerby, is that you've got Tony Perkins, you've got Kelly Shackelford, you've got Gary Bauer. But when you look at the pastoral side, you don't have the Jerry Falwell
That's the point.
that had both. Now, David Jeffress is unapologetic.
Robert
Jeffress. I'm sorry. Thank you. I was thinking David Jeremiah. Both of those guys are unapologetic in their stance for Christian views. But when you look towards some of the younger ministers, they begin to waffle some.
Yeah, what I understand what y'all are talking about is leadership in the Christian community, especially as it affects social issues and political issues and things of that nature. And certainly that's important, and but very important. But and AFA does our part, but we don't have, James Dobson. We don't have the kind of high profile, at least leaders that once described.
Do you think they're gun shy, Tim?
Well, no. I tell you what's happened is that we have had some successes in the pro-life community, pro-life movement, and so forth, on that issue. But what's happened is, with respect to the homosexual agenda, gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual, they systematically sort of took over Hollywood. And this is, I'm going to give you a history lesson here, 30 years ago or so, 30, 40 years ago. And it was combined with the sexual revolution of the 60s, the me generation of the 70s, the sort of promoting hedonism and rejecting the Christian value system, all that combined, and that took over the entertainment industry almost exclusively. And the influence and the power and the reach of the entertainment industry, in particular in this country, is enormous, especially on youth culture. And so, also, so Christians begin to be called names, and a lot of people don't like that, so they resist that. Who likes confrontation? Who likes having to argue? Who likes being called a bigot and a homophobe and a hate monger? All those things. So
right.
A lot of people just shy away from that and say, I don't want a part of that, even if, I know it's not true, but, man, I don't want to be called those things. And so I just be quiet. I don't say anything about things that are immoral.
Get along to get along.
Immoral or unrighteous.
Or go along to get along.
Yeah, so a lot of that's influenced. We have a lot of Christian people who maybe share our beliefs theologically, but then they don't know what to think about these issues because they don't have any firm foundation in biblical worldview. So it's a real problem out there. It's been called postmodernism. I think Chuck Colson wrote a lot on this. Kerby has too, or some people call it a post-Christian America. So we're having to contend with that today. And I think fundamentally, I know I've given you a philosophical class here. I think fundamentally, it's as Kerby described earlier, as the Bible tells us, there is a war between Satan and God on planet Earth. And Christians are going to be supernaturally, inexplicably hated because Jesus was hated.
Right.
And Jesus told us that. So you stand for the morality, the values of Jesus Christ in the Bible, The world hates that, and they will lash out and reject it and accuse you. And so that makes life harder for a lot of us in America who hold to these values. And certainly those around the world we see are persecuted just because they're Christians.
Yeah.
And killed. We see what's happening in Egypt and Sudan and other parts of the world. China, we hear those reports. So fundamentally, it's as the Bible describes. It's a war between Satan and God, and Satan's agents and God's agents here on planet Earth. That's my view, and I'm sticking to it. All
Good
right.
view. This is Today's Issues on American Family Radio. It's Fire Away Thursday. I'm Jim Stanley alongside AFA President Tim Wildman, and we have Kerby Anderson of Probe Ministries on the line with us as he's answering questions. And let's go to Glenda now in Arkansas. Glenda, welcome to Today's Issues.
Hi, this is Brenda.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Brenda.
Hey.
Can we change your name to Glenda? Because it's really going to help us here with our call screen.
Go ahead, Brenda. My apologies.
I don't know what we would do without y'all. Yeah, in one sense, my soul is at peace, but I feel this panic for our nation.
Right.
We are electing people that claim to know God, and yet they're trying to change His Word. I go back to I remember several years ago, they were talking about a shooting in a school. The little girl with a gun in her face, the shooter asked, "Do you believe in God?" She said without a moment's hesitation, yes, and he shot and killed her.
Rachel Scott, it was her.
Yeah,
Rachel Scott was her name, and
Yeah.
she was a student at Columbine
Right.
High School.
People, grown people who claim to know God will do that. You know, and we have people that we elect to office that they give you this
Yeah.
view about how Christian, how wonderful they are. The moment they get in there, oh, it's fine for same-sex marriage to marry.
Right.
Then they talk about the guns. It's the deranged people who are using these guns.
Right.
And then our president says, oh, we've got to get them because we've got to protect our innocent. But yet it's okay to cut a baby's spinal cord when
Right.
it's living outside the womb.
I
You
know. I
and
know it doesn't make any sense, and it's good's called bad, bad's called good, evil's called right.
Yeah.
It's just the sort of the world's turned upside down, and so no, you bring some very good points up. So, but like you said, we got to stick with it. We can't give up. We got to keep sharing our faith, witnessing, and standing for what's right. And if more persecution comes our way, then that's just going to be how it is. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it could.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry,
Thanks
Brenda,
so much.
my apologies. Thank you for your call. You're listening to Today's Issues on American Family Radio. I apologize, Tim. I was trying to get my iPad to stop making noise. So let's go to Eric in Arkansas. Eric, welcome.